Good afternoon, everybody. How are we doing today? Last session of the day for the build. Have you guys had a good build so far? Yep. Liking Windows 10, what you're seeing and what you can build? Excellent. So this is one of those sessions again. So we're going to use Windows 10, but we're going to try to see what it takes to integrate with Office 365 APIs and build some really cool applications. So I'm Chakradeep. Friends know me as Chugs. My team know me as Chugs. I'm a program manager in the Office 365 Work Experiences team. So my team builds the experiences for Delve, the profile, and all the new videos portal and more. And I oversee the developer API platform and how we can give you guys the solutions to connect and get data out of these portals. So please make sure you do submit my evaluation. I value your feedback, so it'll help me to do much more, deliver a better session next year at Build. So what we're going to see today is more about how to access these Office 365 data that is in the cloud and build solutions on top of it. So one of the things you have heard a lot in Keynote is that, hey, we all revolve around this users and the data, and we let them collaborate along with the data with their peers and with your teams. So what we are basically seeing today is you have the options to extend the Office interface, whether it may be the web or the client, and build solutions to it, or you can actually connect to every workload that is there in the cloud, whether it may be mail, calendar, groups, and get the data out to your application. So think like the left portion of this the deck is more about taking your data to Office and building some experience, whereas the rightmost is about how do I take the data out from Office and build my experience for my users. So we're going to see today, we're going to quickly start, build an Hello Windows app, look at the adaptive controls. I'm going to be showing and concentrating on the split view. How many of you have seen split view control in Windows 10? Yep. One or a few folks have raising their hands. So I'm going to use that model. I really like split view, the options we get. And then we're going to see the integrated authentication that's built in with Windows 10. We're going to then jump on Office 365 APIs, look at the SDKs, and then see how we can use that to call within a Windows 10 app. And then we're going to quickly look at the graph, which is the unified API, which is using the Office graph and letting you interact with multiple resources with one endpoint. And of course, it's going to be with a lot of demos. So what is special about Windows 10 and what is special about Windows 10 for developers, right? Not for alone end users. So it is, we have changed the whole architecture to have one core system across all the devices. So you build one app, you actually get one developer platform to build your app and deploy your app, and then it's kind of available for Windows tablet devices or desktop or phones. And there's one dev center, so if you happen to publish your app, there's only one store, and then since it's a universal app, it's able to understand that, hey, I'm deploying it to my customer is downloading in a phone, so I'll get the phone experience. I'm having a tablet, I'll give the tablet experience. So how is this possible? Well, we have this core APIs, and we call it the Universal Windows Platform that is available in all the devices that we can think about that runs Windows, right? So then we give the ability for developers to build with single package. With the Windows 8.1, you would build a Windows Store app, and then you would add a Windows Phone app, right, to it. And so you'll have two packages. So you need to go to Windows Phone Store to submit the Windows Phone, Windows Store to the Windows Modern application. But now with this Universal Windows Platform, we have only one Windows app that you submit to the store, and it is able to adapt the UX according to the device that you're running. And it scales to phone, tablet, PC, and HoloLens and everything that we have seen so far in the Build conference. So we have for developers a number of adaptive UX controls that behave the same way, whereas maybe render it in a different way because you're using a small device versus you're using a desktop with a mouse and a keyboard, or you're using a tablet with some touch gestures. So we have the controls out of the box available in Visual Studio for you to use them in your applications. And the split view that I was talking about is an example of such applications. So some of the examples you can see here, how the buttons are, the size has changed when you're on a phone versus when you're on a tablet or a desktop mode. And you can see the video window that is different. As well as here, you can see a split view control. When you're using on a landscape, it's kind of expanded or non-collapsed. But in the phone, it's actually collapsed and it's available inline and things like that. So you get a lot of opportunities for you to design this adaptive UX in your XAML with Windows 10. Some examples over there, and you get command bars that you can put, and again, you can define these behaviors in your sample. We can see, I'll show you the demo how we can do that. Really good example to look at, just if you have Windows 10 on your phone or device or tablet, you can open the calendar apps, and also I recommend looking at MSN apps. I really like how they have built the UX. It's a really good example to look at. You can see like how the calendars change according to the landscape of the devices. So how do we get these tools? So we have Visual Studio 2015 RC released for build. If you happen to install it, which how many of you have installed already in your laptop? No, not yet, so 2. So when you install it, make sure that you select the Universal Windows App Development Tools. If you select that, that will install all the Windows 10 tools for you on your PC or laptop. So let's look at what it is, how to build a Windows app and how it is in Visual Studio 2015. There you go. So once you install Visual Studio 2015, select New Project. As usual, you'll have Windows Universal node, just like you would have Windows 8, Windows Desktop. So in the Windows Universal, you have a few options. I'm going to select the blank app. I'm going to put it in Projects, and let's call it My App Demo. So that's the project. And you only get one project, and it can support Windows Phone as well as desktop and all other options. So what happens here is it's going to create a very simple project, the same structure that we have known since Windows 8, right? The app.xaml, main page.xaml. So nothing has changed there. There you go. Cancel. So nothing really has changed there. You get everything. You still have your same classes, right? But they're all now in a universal Windows platform that is available across all the devices. That's a very key thing. As a developer, you don't see those, but behind the scenes, that's what happens. And you can see that by default now, you have to choose x86 or x64 or ARM to specifically debug in that platform. We don't have any CPU platform here. But when you publish the package, you'll get to choose, I want to publish it for phone as well as for desktop. And if it's a phone, right now, you would have to choose x86, right? And it doesn't have anything cool to just have demo content. It just has a page with a grid. So I already have a simple app here set up, so I can actually put code so you guys can see what I'm doing. So it's the same thing. It has a grid sitting in the background. It's exactly the same. How many of you have worked 8.1, Windows 8.1? Similar things, exactly the same thing. Nothing has changed here. So I'm going to put row definitions for grid. I'm going to have 2 rows. One is hide auto, and the other one is expand. And then I'm going to put a top grid. So this is just a grid with where is it? There you go. It's a grid with a notorious hamburger button. It's just 3 lines there, and then a meeting title for that 5-minute meeting. So all I have done here is, let me hide these. I've added a grid, I've added a stack panel, and then I added a button, and I've set the button content of this text, which will actually render the 3 lines, which is the hamburger button. And again, this is not a design guideline. This is just some options that I'm using to build my app. And I've just set the font weight and foreground, and then I added a button with a back button, which I've currently collapsed. But if I have a navigation helper, I can actually enable the button if I have to enable, which I will show you in another demo how I enable that. Then I have a text block, which just puts 5-minute meeting. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my split view. So split view, it's basically you start with defining it split view and then giving it a name, row, and then there are some options. So split view is kind of a, how many of you used Android? Nope. Android? Yeah, so there's the concept where in Android you have this hamburger button, you click and you get a menu out, and then there are some options hidden, right? So split view is kind of having a similar UX, but not really following Android's guideline, but it's kind of like giving you the option to have, hey, I need to have a menu on my sidebar on the left, and I need to have some content here that changes according to whatever I choose or whatever I select. So what happens here is you get a pane, which is your left menu, and I'm going to put something there, so we'll be able to see what I get. Now I got these options. So this is what split view does. It gives you a pane where you can inject some content as menu items. You could place it left or right, and then I get another content frame where I can load my content, whether it may be a different page or is a user control or whatever, right? So it gives a really good view to split and then display content accordingly. You could have put this in an app bar, right? We could do that as you do in 8.1. This is a new way of looking at how we can build some new experiences that adapts to different UX. So all I've done here is I've created a list view, just static content. I have a stack panel. I have this new thing called symbol icon. With the symbol icon, I can actually have many symbols out of the box. So you can see here, there are a lot of symbols that I can use, right? I can use permissions, phone book, pictures, pin. There are a lot of stuff here. So I'm choosing something to say that, hey, I want a people symbol, I want a calendar symbol, I want a mail, and then I want something for document. And then I've put up in the stack panel in a list view. So that's exactly what I've done here, nothing much. For my content, what I have said is I need a frame. So now what happens is I can actually load stuff into this frame, put it in the navigation stack. I can remove stuff from this frame, and I can remove stuff from the navigation stack. And I get a lot of options that I can do. And I can build separate pages for my different views that I need. So for people, I could build one. For mail, I could build one and send accordingly whenever I have to. So what I have here is I already have a people page, right? Again, this is all right now we're looking at static data. The thing that we're going to do is we're going to go look at Office 365 and bring all our users instead of static data in the next demo. So this static data here is just building a list of users, right? I have some static content, which is a grid view, stack panel. In the stack panel, I'm going to have an ellipse. In the ellipse.fill, I have an image brush that goes and looks for an image in my current project solution package. And I'm building it as a grid view, so I actually get the scroller, the ability to resize so that all the contents align to its size, and several options I get for free in grid view. If I use a list view, I need to make sure I have a data template of grid view and wrap grid, and I need to understand how to wrap things around. Grid view actually is really easy to get started. So everything is a stack panel of the same type, so you could potentially make this into a data template and have a model attached to it, which is what you're going to see in Office 365 API demo. So that's it. Now, if you look at my backend code, I have a main page loaded event, and I've said for the frame that I have, split view content frame, navigate to the people page. So now what happens is when you load up your app, you're actually going to load the people page in the frame. And the other thing that I've done is, hey, my window size changes, right? It may start smaller, it may start bigger, but that happens, expand the top grid that I see in my main page. So if you see here, the grid on the top actually doesn't expand. I haven't set a specific width for that grid. I'm going to change it in the runtime as soon as and when the app adapts to its different UX. So how does this look? Let's first test in a phone, right? Any questions? So there it is. That's a split view. So I can actually do this. I can select, if I have an event, I can respond to that. Or I can say people, and I get a really good grid view here with adapting to the Windows Phone interface. Now, if I check this in my local machine, let's deploy it to my laptop here. I'm going to get the full width, right? By default, it's going to open up. And I get the grid view again, aligning to its desktop width and height. And I get the same experience as I got in my Windows Phone. I can even minimize. I can do a lot of things, right? But you can see the grid view, everything aligning to it. I can also see the scroll bar. So it's a pretty nice little thing that is very easy to build. Now let's do something. I am in my desktop mode. I have a really good screen. Why don't we always make this, open so users can get the ability to see what is there instead of needing to actually click something and see whether, oh, there is people, there is calendar, that's mail. And depending on size, let's change something. So Windows 10 provides the state triggers now to actually adapt your UX and set properties based on some conditions, right? And here, the condition we are saying is, oh, when my app is running full screen, do something. When my app is on a small screen, let me utilize that space and don't show everything, but show the things that I need. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add some state triggers. Right? So the Visual State Manager .Visual State Group. So in the grid, when this happens, when my adaptive trigger minimum window width, so the window width of my app is 641, which I'm assuming that I can use this number, then do these specific things, right? So I can say when the window is 641, hey, for the split view, set the display mode as inline. Split view is pane open, make it true. The toggle pane button, if I have, I don't think I have one there, but I think I have the back button there, and collapsed, right? And then change some properties of other things that I have in my app. Similarly, I define another visual state as medium state, and then that medium state I'm setting the window height to be 321. If it's 321, then do these things. And there's a narrow state, right? When narrow state is, if it's 0, then go and do some things. So now what happens, if I actually execute this, it's going to go full mode, and you can see the split view actually opening the pane by default. And if I do this, you can see it's actually closing, right? So now you're actually adapting to how the app is behaving in your PC here. And if I do this again, I'm going to get it open by default. So it's really easy now to actually adapt your code to different UX and different sizes, especially when you have to just set, oh, if this is my size, do this and do that. You could do it also in code. You don't have to do it in XAML. But all I'm doing here is I'm setting I'm creating visual states in the visual state group of the grid and saying and defining the properties based on the window height. You could say different properties too. So depending on the window height, I'm changing some properties in my split view to adapt and behave respectively. Now, nothing happens in my phone because my phone is actually right here. I haven't responded to landscape or portrait, but there the height is actually within the limits of what I have. So the same experience what we saw before is what you get here. There's no change here. But if we have a phone that is able to kind of adapt to its PC, and then you open this, like what we saw in the keynote, the Windows Phone Continuum, and you open this app on the monitor, which is much bigger size, you would see now that scaling up, the split view is scaling up to that UX. So that's Windows 10, a really simple way. I'm taking only one of the many things that Windows 10 provides, the split view, and taking, again, one of the many things, the Visual State Manager, and then creating visual states to actually adapt the split view UX according to the size and the app where it is running. So let's switch to the PowerPoint. Any questions? Am I going fast? No? All good? Excellent. So we saw about Windows 10 built a simple app with split view. So let's go to Office now. So in Office 365, you can see that this concept, again, we have told this a lot of times, is it's about the users and the content, and it's about your app, how you get the content. So we have different workloads like files, email, conversations, there's events, there's people, there's groups, and we saw this earlier. I'm not going to talk about this again. But how do we get this data out? The thing that we're concentrating here is I'm building a Windows 10 app. I want to now get the data out from Office. So we provide some rich APIs called Office 365 APIs. So they're a set of APIs for different capabilities or workloads, or you can call it whatever you want, which is easier for you. And we provide REST APIs to access those endpoints. So we have files, sites, mail, calendar, users, groups, conversations, notes. The idea behind here is you don't have to remember where to go for what. We are going to help you with these REST APIs to understand, you want to talk to contacts, let me give you a contact endpoint. You want to talk to files, let me give you a files endpoint. It's going to be as simple as that. And of course, there's going to, one of the things we get benefit here is, since Office 365 is in the cloud and it's backed by Azure AD, the whole APIs are part of the Azure AD Common Consent Framework. I will talk about Azure AD Common Consent Framework in a moment. So what does this look like? Well, we have this really big diagram. We have all the workloads. We have Azure AD actually helping to keep those workloads alive and providing access to those. And then they're all REST APIs, so they're exposed using the OData v4 REST format. And we have SDKs for almost any platform you're looking for. It's not just about Windows 10 or Windows 8.1. It's also about, hey, I'm an Android developer. I want to build build an app that talks to Office 365 APIs. We have an SDK for that. We similarly have iOS SDK. And everything also, the .NET SDK also works in Xamarin, which we had a talk today morning about building Xamarin apps with Office 365. So we showed how to actually use these SDKs in a Xamarin project and build iOS and Android and Windows apps. And you can then use in any platform you want. So that's the power of Office 365 APIs. So Azure AD, coming back to this. So what is this Azure AD? Well, it provides a single identity platform. So everything in the cloud for us is backed by Azure AD. That means all of your users, all your groups, all your applications, everything can be governed by Azure AD. So when Office itself is using Azure AD as its way to access, to provide access to different workloads and resources, you get a single authentication flow across all your devices and all your services in Office 365, whether it's the Exchange, SharePoint, or even the services like Power BI. It's exactly the same way how you authenticate here. And it's using the industry standard protocol OAuth. So it's very similar to saying, my app needs access to your Facebook profile. Do you want to allow it or not? Right? So that's the exact concept here, except that now you will be working with Office 365 instead of Facebook. You can see the screenshot over there, which is asking the different permissions that the user needs to consent. Now, if you're building this app for your organization, an administrator can override that capability and say, I'm going to consent for all my users, so you don't have to say every user in the organization needs to consent because it's an internal app. And if it's something that you're publishing to the store, then the app where it is getting downloaded, that administrator could decide whether they could choose to consent in the Azure AD for all of their organization users, or when they install and push it to users in their internal store, they could say, my users will consent the app. So if you have an expense app, for example, your administrator can decide whether everybody in the user in my organization needs to consent, or I'm just going to consent and let everybody use the expense tool. So one other thing, there's no username password. So everything what happens with Azure AD is that it's redirected to Azure AD. You get authenticated, and then it gives you a token, and you use the token to talk to these APIs. So let's quickly go through the different features we have. So the directory, the Azure AD directory, gives you the ability to manipulate users and groups, as well as it has a different core capabilities to go and manage the user or manage the actual tenant. But today we are interested in getting the data out, which is basically our users and other workloads. So you can see the endpoint here being graph.windows.net / contoso.com, your tenant.com, and then you can say users and groups. And then we have extended profiles, which means that I can even get more information because I may have a SharePoint profile and I may even have my Exchange where I have my own photo. So you can also get those through these Office 365 API set. And then we have mail, calendar, contacts, and conversations, which are in Exchange. So you have your outlook.office365.com, and then you can use /API/v1 me messages for inbox, events for your calendar events, and contacts for your personal contacts in Exchange. And similarly for files, you can go to the user's OneDrive, which is the first URL you see, which is your tenant-my.sharepoint.com/personal/username, or you could go to a specific site default document library and get the content out. So one of the difficulties is you have shown me a lot of endpoints. How do I remember those? Do I need to put a constants file and then always use it and refer to MSDN and update it regularly? No, you don't have to. That's why we have this service called Discovery Service. As its name suggests, it's going to help you discover the different workloads and capabilities and give you the resource ID in Azure for that capability and the endpoint URI that you need to use to call that service. So depending on the region, depending on the data center, your Exchange server, for example, could be different. And for different users, the OneDrive for Business endpoint URL could be different. So you can't really hard code any of the URLs. You have to use a discovery service to actually query and say, give me this user's files endpoint, or give me this user's Exchange endpoint. And you will get that. And with that, you can say to Azure AD, hey, I need to get access to contacts. Here's the resource ID for contacts. And once you get the access token, you can use the access token and use the endpoint URI, construct the URL, and send it to Azure to get more data out. So here are some examples. You have get 5 messages from inbox. It's really like me/folder/inbox/messages top 5. So it's OData. So we really have implemented the OData spec. So anything you see in the spec and you come and try do it, it will mostly work. I think there are a few features that we haven't implemented yet, like annotations and things like that, but we are trying to have this broad set of capabilities of OData come into the REST API and provide that. And so there are some sessions that you can also watch in the channel 9 if you want to get more deeper into these APIs and how they work and what are the rich features that they offer. So one of the things we saw was it's all in Azure AD. You need to authenticate. There's OAuth flow. So how does this work in Windows 10? How many of you are familiar with OAuth? Okay, quite a few. So to simply describe what OAuth is in simple terms, I think there is a authorization endpoint. There is a token endpoint. Authorization endpoint will it's somewhere where users get where you push your users to, and that will bring up the login screen. You will log in. Once you have successfully logged in, then you can get something out of it. And then in Azure AD, it'll actually use as OpenID Connect, so you can actually get a OpenID token, and then you can use that token to say this is my user. And then there's a token endpoint, which is actually serving tokens for different resources. Then you can actually use that and say, I'm going to get token for contacts. I'm going to get token for mail. So, but if you actually go and use this in REST API, everything is a REST API. So if you actually use this whole thing in REST API, it's quite tedious. And you have to manage the refresh token. You have to manage all those things, make sure the user is signed in, make sure the session is valid, and all those stuff. It's very complex. So what options do we get in Windows 10? And this, very specifically, I am talking about Windows 10. So Windows 10 takes a bold step forward. It has the authentication providers inbuilt in Windows 10 that is accessible even for developers and other applications. So it makes it easier for you to now talk to AAD within using the same Windows libraries, core libraries that's available in Windows, Windows desktop or tablet or Windows Phone or even Xbox, right? So that's the promise we are delivering, and that's the promise you're getting even with the authentication libraries. Now, I'm using a very early build with this authentication scheme, so I can only show you in Windows desktop or tablet, which is the same. I can't run it in Windows Phone today, but I'm pretty sure that the authentication team is working to push it forward to Windows Phone. But the guarantee is what you're seeing today in my demo is exactly what you will see in the Windows Phone. So we have something called Web Account Provider API. So this Web Account Provider is you could consider this is Web Authentication Manager running in steroids, right? How many of you use Web Authentication Manager in Windows 8.1? So it's okay, so there's one. So it's a way to connect to these cloud services, authentication protocols, and then get back authenticated result. So users you can connect to Twitter, and you can connect to different things. So this just takes a step forward to make it more streamlined and available to different platforms of different devices, of Windows devices. So the first thing you start is you need to find the account provider. Now, account provider, you could say Facebook is an account provider, Azure AD is an account provider. You can write your own account provider, but for Azure AD, there's already an account provider built in, ready for you to consume. So you use the API called Find Account Providers Async and tell it to get me the Azure AD provider. And the way that you do is you actually give the authority of the Azure AD, which is login.windows.net. Now, this could be different for Facebook, if Facebook does something for Windows 10. And there's a similar thing for Microsoft account, which is also inbuilt for you to connect to and authenticate with Microsoft account provider. So once you get that, the next thing is you can use the Web Account Manager APIs to go and request token from Azure AD for different resources. Or if you have already done that flow, you can use get token silently async and don't prompt for authentication because everything is cached. You can actually bring it from the cache instead of requesting again. There is a session called the 709 session, which is actually the PM of this whole AAD account provider. So I would recommend highly to watch this session and understand how it relates with the whole Windows 10 concept for the user, and as well as building apps that uses these providers. Now again, today it's an early build, so things don't really work very well, but I'm trying my best to show you guys. So if anything fails or if you see something happening, I will tell you during the demo, and they'll be fixed with more builds in the recent builds. So once you use the to request token or get silent token, what you get back is a response, right? So the response is basically going to say, I'm going to give you a web token request result, and that will have whether whatever the process you started was successful. If there is an error, if it needs more authentication or user interaction, I will let you know. And then that has a web account, which will tell who the user is, signed in user, and what are some of the properties like, hey, what is this user ID, or what is the user picture, and things like that. Because it's all in Azure AD, once you sign in, it should give you an Azure AD user object, and that's what web account does. So there is the other library that we have been using so far called Active Directory Authentication Library. How many of you have used Active Directory Authentication Library? Yep, few. So that's also another way to actually authenticate with Azure AD, and it supports a lot of flows, and it abstracts a lot of protocol. Like if you want to have ADFS and complex things and username, password, there's a lot of options there, and it's actually cross-platform. So you get ADAL for iOS, ADAL for Java, and also the ADAL v3 preview is running across Xamarin as well as Windows UAP as well as Windows 8.1. So it's a much broader spectrum of devices that it supports, platform it supports. And it also does the same thing like what Web Account Manager does in terms of handling the access tokens and managing the refresh tokens to make sure the user is valid and the session is valid. Vittorio, who's kind of, I call him the Azure AD god, authentication god. He's a PM for the ADAL library. And he has been doing, I think today morning he had a session, And just before the 2 o'clock one, he had another session talking about how do you build native applications that are talking to Azure AD, as well as how do you build web applications that you're talking to Azure AD. So those are really good sessions if you want to understand how to use ADAL and how to build solutions on top of that. So how do we choose one, right? That's again the next question. Do I need to use Web Account Manager, ADAL? Well, if you are only targeting Windows 10 apps, then I think there's no reason why you wouldn't use Web Account Manager, because it actually streamlines and enables the integration with Windows 10 and provides you much better value. At the same time, if you are building a Xamarin app along with Windows UAP, then you don't want to write authentication, deal with a lot of authentication code. So you could actually use ADAL, share the authentication layer across all the three. Now, if you want to look at how we do that, you can look at my session. I think it's 661 code. Today morning, 9 o'clock, we actually showed how to actually share the authentication code across iOS, Android, and Windows app. So if you use ADAL, that's clearly possible. But if you use Web Account Manager, it's basically only Windows 10 apps and above, right? Now, any app in the store that has ADAL will still work in Windows 10. So there's nothing that you have to compile or do anything like that. So what it takes for us to now take what we have, the Windows 10 app, and talk to Office 365. Well, the first step was create the Windows app. We already created. The next step is actually we need to register our app in Azure AD. So whichever tenant, I'm a developer, I have a developer tenant, I need to start using my tenant to actually say, hey, I want to register my Windows app in Azure AD. So then I can configure the permissions I need to talk to these different resources in Office, which is mail, calendar, contacts. And once I have done that, I need to now write code to authenticate with Azure AD and then authorize my application to talk to the Contacts API or Calendar API, and then I can get the access token back. Once I have the access token, I can write my API code, which is maybe I'm using REST or maybe I'm using the .NET SDK. It doesn't matter. I have my access token, which is validated for the user, it's validated for the application, with which I can now make further requests. Easy? Similar to any cloud service we have today, right? So there's one more thing, registering a Windows app with Azure AD. That's a little bit different to how ADAL does this and how Web Account Manager does this today. So there is this redirect URI, or you can call it callback URI, or there's also another name called reply URI. What it does is it ensures that the request that is coming to Azure AD for that client ID or for that app, it helps to validate whether it's actually coming from the right application. So the redirect URI, what you put in there, will help Azure AD to validate the incoming request to say, am I getting the request from the right application? I'm not getting something from somebody else. So for example, in Windows Store app, you take the callback URI. That's a URI that you push to the store. When a request is going to Azure AD, hey, somebody is actually signing in and requesting access to the Contacts API, it's going to check the Azure AD app redirect URI with the Windows Store callback URI. If they both match, then it's the right application. So that's validation is done in Azure AD. Now with 8.1 apps, you can use the Windows Store callback URI. So you can get that by saying get web authentication manager.get application call redirect URI. There's an API for that. But with Web Account Manager, the Windows 10, they have a hard rule in which how they check and validate this. So what happens here is you need to get the app SID, which basically is part of the app callback URI, the red color. And then we need to form a separate redirect URI with the prefix ms_appxweb/whack microsoft.aad.broker plugin, and then suffix with the actual SID. So there's no method actually to get this whole string. We are working with the PMs to see how we can actually enable this much easier. But today you have to do this manually, so I'll show you how to do that. If you're using ADAL, you don't have to worry about this. You can go with your callback URI that you get from the Web Authentication Broker API. So that's totally valid. If you use the Windows 10 stuff, you need to make sure you use the blue and red together. And how do I register apps? Of course, you can go manually and register the apps, but we also have the Office 365 API tools for Visual Studio that allows you to register your app with Office and then specify the permissions you want to specify. We'll see it in the demo, which will be much clearer. And we also have the SDKs for different services, and also we have the ADIL.NET and Web Account Manager APIs in Windows 10. We have SDKs for Exchange, which includes mail, contacts, and calendar, SharePoint, files. There's a little bug in OData libraries that these SDKs depend on that makes Exchange not work in Windows 10 apps today. But the team has already understood what the problem is, and we're working to issue an update very soon in probably 2 weeks or 3 weeks' time. So let's look at the Web Account Manager code and then look at how we use the Office 365 APIs. So it's only an hour, so I have my I have my demo here. So what I have here is very similar split view that we saw. So I have my main page, right? My main page is a grid, the same top grid, the same thing that I saw built in my first demo. And then I have my split view. And now in my pane, I'm actually data binding to my navigation to the pane model that I have in my code. So if you see here, I have my nav links. They're basically building, here's my symbol, here's my label, and here's a target to where I need to go. And then in the view model, I have a nav links view model, which is basically building that static list view we saw in the first demo as an object and then model, so it's binding with the nav split view pane list view. So I'm creating a new nav link and saying, hey, it's contacts. Symbol is basically windows.ui.xaml.controls symbol.people, right? And symbol.cal, globe, message, mail. And then I'm saying, the navigation target for people is go to people page. For globe, go to events page. For message, go to files. For mail, go to inbox. Very similar to how you would do in XAML. I'm just data binding it. So then what I have is I have my split view.content. It's basically going to, it's basically going to navigate to different pages depending on where you are. And if I look at my actual code, I have the same thing, right? When size changes, I'm changing my top grid. When the main page is loaded, I'm navigating my split view to people page. And I have my nav links view model. I'm also doing that, setting the item source as to my navigation links. And then this one you can actually ignore for now. But basically, the whole back button is going to be part of this Windows SDK. Right now in this build, it's not there. So even if I have the code, it actually doesn't show the back button in the title bar. But when it comes, this will actually work. You don't have to build a back button. You can actually use the Windows 10 inbuilt back button and back navigation history to traverse the navigation. And when I click a pane item, I'm getting the nav link, and I'm making the split view frame to navigate to that page. Because I have the model, I know which page to go for. Other things are basically, I'm clicking on the hamburger button. I need to kind of open and close, right? It's a basic thing. And then I have my navigation helper because I'm not using the Windows 10 inbuilt navigation. You can see it here, right? It's basically a navigation stack, nothing different to what you see in Windows 8.1. It's basically, I think, the same code that you have for navigation helper. It just stacks all the frame, whatever I change in the split view content, and it has a stack. So whenever I go back, I just remove one and go to that page in the back history. So based on that, I look at, if I can go back, go back. And then if it's navigated, change the back button visibility. So let me run this app to actually show you what happens. So it's going to load up my app. It's going to ask me to sign in now because I need to sign into my tenant. And once I sign in, so this is Web Account Manager doing its thing where it's going to say, hey, I'm going to register this account. Well, I'm going to associate this account with the currently signed in user. So I can know that this user also has a cloud account that is connected to this domain and such app is using it, right? Right now, this is not complete, so you'll be seeing this several times, but think this is all in an ideal world. It's all done and it's all working without any issues. So it's going to go do Windows 10 thing, and then come back and go to Azure AD. And then once everything is successful, now what it's going to do is it's actually going to look up my Azure AD users and pull those users. So I got now, these are all not static. They're actually coming from the cloud. So you can actually see for the folks that don't have a picture, they have a default picture here. And for the folks that have a picture, you actually see they have a different thing. So let me log in here to my Outlook. I'm going to go with Ali B. Did anybody guess what 5-minute meeting meant? So all I'm doing here is I'm going to create a 5-minute meeting with someone. Well, it's not actually 5, 10, or 15 minutes. And say, this is my time duration. This is when I want. And then it'll create a meeting for that user, send a meeting request for that user. So I'm going to delete. There are no emails here. So I'm going to click on Ali Bell, and I'm going to get, oh, what do you want to do? You want to set something for 15 minutes, 30 minutes? Let's set for 30 minutes. Today, tomorrow, someday. If I do someday, I'm going to get, I can choose my date. So this control is a date picker control. Again, this is an adaptive UX control. If you see in Windows Phone, it'll adapt to its UI, UX. And if you see in Windows 10, it's actually going to adapt to that. So if I do this, it's going to give, behave apparently. So I'm going to say I need something for tomorrow, right? Again, it pops up because the cache isn't working yet. But now what it's doing is it's trying to connect to the service in my code to actually go and put an invite. Now it's discovering my Office Exchange. And again, you'll see this prompt because it's trying to go and send an invite. If every cache, all the cache is working, you won't actually see this again and again. And that's the thing about using Dogfood bills and making sure things are coming along nicely. Actually pretty nice if you actually do this several times, and then finally they'll say, oh, here's the build, it works, everything. And then it'll be like, yes, things are nice now. So there you go, 5-minute meeting created. So we got a toast notification too. Oh, there it is. We actually got our mail. And you can accept. So that's the app that I built. So it's very easy to say I need to set up a meeting with someone, and it sends a meeting, and boom, done. And you can see the notification here. And it integrates with the Windows 10 toast message, puts a little coffee image, and then title, and then subject event created. So the first thing we need to do is we need to integrate with Office, right? So here's my first app that I created. Excuse me. To show you what the experience of Office 365 API tools is, I'm actually getting a new project. If you go to the Add Connected Service, you can see different options that you can connect to the cloud services available. Think this as Add Service Reference, but for the cloud connected services world, right? There's no longer a WCF endpoint. There's no longer username password authentication or SAML or those things. It's all about OAuth, and maybe different services may use different things, right? So here you can see that we also have Salesforce. So we partnered with Salesforce to actually build an experience so you can actually connect to Salesforce data from your app, from your applications in Visual Studio. Similarly, we have Office 365 APIs. So when you configure, it's going to ask you, hey, the first step you need to do is register your app. So it's going to say, as a developer, I'm going to register this app in my developer tenant. So I'm using the same tenant. And now it's going to go and create the Azure AD app and then enumerate all the resources that I have and display it here, right? So now I can say, oh, for my calendar, you know what? I need to just read and write. I need the full access. For my contacts, I need just to read your contacts. For my files, I need read your files. So all this means is this app has access to read users' files. This app has access to read users' contacts. So now when I click add, it's going to add all the NuGet packages for this for the services you selected and all the necessary dependencies that you need to successfully run your SDK code. So it does everything in one go. So it helps you to kind of not use the REST API code. If you want, you can totally use the REST API code at this point, because once this registers an app in Azure AD, you get a client ID. You get the identity of your app in Azure AD, with which you can use the normal REST APIs and build your app. So if you look at what happened here, we have service reference folder. We added Office 365. Now, if you want to actually suddenly want to understand, oh, what do I do next? Well, you can actually click the Getting Started, and we will take you to the actual page where you can find information on how to interact with these APIs. So all the information is here. And then if you look at app.xaml, you actually see the client ID and AID instance. So if you look at our code in 5-minute meeting, the first thing we do is so I have a base page view model that basically all the pages inherit this view model, and I have get access token and another one to use REST APIs. So the get access token, I'm using the web account manager code. So web account manager code is very simple, right? First I need my provider. Remember, first I need my AAD provider. So I'm going to get my AAD provider here. Right? So all I'm doing here is using Web Authentication Core Manager and saying find account provider async and giving the AAD authority. So exact thing that we saw on the PowerPoint slide, right? Find account provider async. Now, this is an asynchronous operation. This is going to go to Windows 10 and find out, hey, do I have a provider? If there's a provider, send me the web account provider for this authority. Once I get that, I can create my web token request. The web token request is going to get the AAD account provider. For AAD, you can send the next one as null because there's no specific scope we have in Azure AD. I also send my app client ID, right? Because AAD now needs to know for what app you're requesting this access. And then request prompt type, I'm setting it to default. So if I need to get authenticated, let me get authenticated. And then I'm adding the properties. Hey, what is the authority again that I need to go? And then what is the resource that you need me to get access for? Once you get this web token request, you say Web Authentication Core Manager. Again, that's something the same static class that we're using. Get token silently async, right? And you pass this request to say this is my request, go execute it and come back if it's successful or failure, right? So you get a web token request result. And then you can check the response status. So I just executed something with Azure AD. I'm getting back something. What it is? Well, if the response status means that user interaction is required, then I need to do something. There is no authentication done yet, so I need to authenticate the user. And I have several things. Oh, I want to switch account. There's a provider error. There is success. There is, user canceled it, and things like that. So if it's user interaction required, you need to first run request token because there is no cache. I have to initialize the cache. For that cache, I need you to sign in and authorize the app. So once you do that, you actually get the right token result now, with which you can now check, if it's success, you get the response data, and that response data has web account. And that web account will give you the name of the user and things like that. Today, this current SDK version that you download in Visual 2015, the web account property may be empty and you may not get the whole things, but the updated SDKs are when we give you everything, will kind of give you the right information about the user logged in. So now I have the web token response, right? So in the web token response, if you see, you actually have the token. So that token is what you need. Now this method is a function. So wherever I use it, I send a resource and I get back a result. Now let's look at what happens in my page. Where is it? So here's my pages. I have the people page. Right? People page is my page where I load all the people, users. So here you can see I'm using the same grid view that I use in my Windows 10 demo, but now I am using a data template so I can actually data bind the information that I get from the service. If you look at here, all I'm doing is initializing the page view model, initializing the navigation helper. I will be publishing this code in GitHub so you can actually download and look at in depth how this navigation helper works. But let's stick to the topic of how do we get the users from Office. So when the page is loaded, I'm checking for the model, view model, initialize the view model, and then if it is equal to 0, I'm saying go get the users in the people view model. And here in the get users, I'm actually now using the get access token that we saw in the model, base view page model, and sending the resource ID, graph.windows.net, and that's going to get the token for AAD Graph. And then I have my AAD Graph SDK client, which is Active Directory client, and then I pass the URI, which basically here is tenant ID and graph.windows.net. Now this information should be given by web account, the web account in the response. But since the response is not working, I'm hard coding my tenant ID. If that worked, I would have got the tenant ID and I need not have a hard coded value in there. So that's the only time gap solution. Once we have the web account giving us the right details, you can actually get the tenant ID from the result. And then all it needs is it needs to send the token. We already requested the token. So since it's an async task, I'm wrapping it to be an async and then returning the token back. Now, after that, the client is initialized. I can do AAD client dot, I got everything, applications, context, devices, directory objects, directory roles, groups. I can even go and just check at me. This is my current logged in user. Or I can just go to users here and do a bunch of stuff, which is exactly executing the query on the users entity. So here I'm just saying users are execute async. It's going to get all my users. You could even say I need to say users dot get by object ID, order by descending, or select where some condition, or you can just take 5. You can do a lot of things, which gets converted to an OData query, right? So take 5, maybe top 5, right? And then it's going to give you a page result. What I'm doing here, I'm just getting the current page and then building my person model. And I'm also downloading the thumbnail photo for every user. The thumbnail is a stream content, so you need to request a stream from the service. So I'm just doing this, which is, hey, I'm going to download the thumbnail photo, which is going to give me a stream. Now, until that stream is complete, get the bytes, and then create a new bitmap image with that byte. And then I can bind this bitmap image to my person object. And once I bind this whole collection of persons to the grid view, I actually now get the whole picture and the title of the person, name of the person, from AAD Graph client. Simple. It's just a similar flow that you get on how to connect to a service and get the code. Now, the other pages that we have are basically the events page, select day page, which is basically a page to have, hey, which day do you want? It's very small. Let's see. It's not showing, but you can see today, tomorrow, someday over here. And then you have select duration. Now, select duration was the last page we saw. So what happens there is when the user clicks everything, we record all of the information here, and then you have select day page. And over here, you can see what happens is I have add event. So in the add event, I'm sending this page over here in the view model to add the event. And there, what I'm going to do now is I don't know the exchange endpoint. So I'm using the discovery service, same code, right? Except that now you're using the discovery service resource ID. It's api.office.com/discovery. And then you create the discovery client, same as you created AD graph client. And you get the token back, and you send the token for creating the discovery client with which you're now discovering the capability for calendar. So you could say, I want to discover contacts here, right? And then you get the access token for that discovered resource. So this discovery calendar service info has the endpoint URI and the resource ID that you want for calendar. So you don't now have to hard code this value. So once you have that, now you can actually go and say, I need to just use, construct the REST URI for my object, which is my calendar event. And I'm using the endpoint URI that I discovered and construct the URL for adding an event. And the base URI is whatever your exchange server is, /me/events. And then I'm constructing the post URL. So here I'm not using the SDK. So this is how it becomes complex, because now I'm just using REST API, normal API programming using the HTTP client. And I create the HTTP client, and then I send the request. What send request looks like? Normal HTTP call. You create the header. Now you have to send the access token. So you create the bearer authorization header, and then you put in the access token there. Then you add some things for if you want to understand what client tag is, and then you send the response. If the response comes back, oh, the user is not authorized, then you again initialize, go get the access token. The access token again is going to use the web account manager and come back with that. And finally, we send the request here. So that sends the request to create a meeting request for that user between the user selected in the UI, and it creates a meeting request, which we saw how you can now go and accept or delete or whatever you want to do with that. So that's how you can use the SDK. So we saw the Active Directory Graph Client, which is using the SDK. And then this is like, if I want to use the pure REST format, how does that code look? So that's exactly the demo that we saw of selecting a user and then creating a meeting. I know we have run out of time. We also announced a new API called Unified API. So one of the things we saw here was we used the discovery service. If you don't want to use discovery service, we are streamlining this process to say, hey, it doesn't matter how much data or whichever endpoints or how many workloads you go to. There's a unified API that helps you to go connect to this data and get the data out. There's a 641 session that you can go and look at to how to actually work with Graph. I was having a little demo, but we have run out of time. So thank you for coming for the session.